Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I am your host, Tenitra, Batiste, and alongside me is DeShaun, Tate. The Locked On Hawks Postcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So DeShaun, tonight was actually Trade Luka 9.0. The first 8 meetings saw the Hawks and Mavs split the series, but this was no way for the home team to start a 6-game home stand. We'll get into it in the and one, and we'll talk about who got next. But first, want to give you T and Tate's takes on tonight's historic 148-143 loss to the Mavs. Now, DeShaun, you said for you, the takeaway was, so what did you expect?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I feel like a lot of people are thinking. Or at least I personally feel like should be thinking, right? Because this is not even about Luka or what Luka's capable of, or, you know, the way that the Dallas Mavericks play or have been playing lately in comparison to the Hawks, but just the Hawks and the way that they've played lately.
Yeah.
You know, some of the games, excuse me, coming down to, you know, a buzzer beater or coming straight off the West Coast and getting torched in some of those games. And just even prior to all of that, not living up to the expectation that has been put forth before them. Not even that the expectations were ridiculously high for this team, like anything like that. But, you know, I think it speaks volume when they have not only haven't exceeded those expectations, but not even met the mid-level expectations for them. I think you add a little bit of fuel to the fire or insult to injury when you start talking about Kyrie Irving not playing in this game as well. I feel like Dallas just pretty much, I know I've said it before, you know, do what they're supposed to do, but kind of like kicked the team down that was struggling already. And that's what, you know, I feel like this Dallas team was more than capable of doing. That's what number 77 has been more than capable of doing. And it was just really bad timing all across the board for a team like the Atlanta Hawks has been struggling. Plus at home, we talked about before, you know, being on the road and playing better on the road than they have at home. This being a home game, I know it sounds crazy to be in reverse like that, but that's something that kind of seems like it was almost expected. What did you expect?
Yeah. And that's kind of a tough thing because when you look at the fact that we're looking at a team now in the Hawks that's 18-27, we're talking 9 games under 500. And we look at where this team was 45 games in last season, 23-22. Right. And they were riding what ended up being a 5-game winning streak. So that is kind of troubling because the whole concept of the definition of success for this season was supposed to be a team that gets out of the play-in round. Like for once, for the love of God, no more play-in round. This should be a season where we see you actually get into the postseason within the top 6.
No doubt.
But that's very difficult to do when you're 9 games below 500 and you're looking at where you were at the same time last year and you were a game above 500. So just like we're not talking about expectations of this team going to a conference final or even going to an NBA title. It was just get in the mix of those teams that are truly contenders. How about we do that? But you can't do that. You didn't do that. And here's another example of how you didn't do it. And we're going to talk a little bit about something later in the and one that you just touched on, DeShaun, and that is, what does it look like late in a game that's this close, and how do you not come out on the winning side?
Yeah.
Now, my takeaway was with that 73-point night from Luka Doncic, it quieted the cheers, but not the whispers. I was in the arena tonight, and there were a boatload of Luka Doncic fans. I won't call them Mavs fans because I saw enough 77 jerseys to know that they were just there. Yeah, they were just there for the guy named Luka. And when I say quieted the cheers, but not the whispers, he, along with the rest of that Mavs team, eventually quieted the cheers of a Hawks fan base that was still in the majority there, but they didn't quiet the whispers of that same fan base, whether it was in the arena or whether it was on social media. The same conversation that we have been having since the trade, the swap, whatever you want to call it, the 3-5 to the 5-3. Okay. The D-Town to A-Town, DFW to ATL, however you slice it, that conversation became louder than just a whisper tonight, because once again, it was the comparison of Trae Young to Luka Doncic, and did the Hawks make the right move in trading to get Trae and letting Luka go to Dallas? Well, when you look at a guy in Luka Doncic who literally shattered Wilt Chamberlain's all-time scoring record against the Hawks, and then you look at the fact that he did this in 73 points on, 8 of 13 from three, 16 from the free throw line. I wanted to make sure I got the rest of the stat line right, because I knew for sure it was 25 of 33 from the field in 45 minutes. So he actually somehow, some way squeezed in a little 3-minute break to get himself reset. I mean, to me, I understand why the fan base was still whispering and jabbering at the arena. And I understand why they were back on social asking the same question that will not die, which is, man, did the Hawks do the right thing?
And that's the other thing is, I feel like seeing a game like this, whether you've seen it up close and personal the way you did, whether you've seen it from afar, whether you've seen it on another country, whether you've seen it from the moon, right? You could not help but to think, number one, is Luka putting a little bit more emphasis on this game than he normally would, just to kind of make a point to put a statement on things? But
right.
You also couldn't help but to think we could have had this in Atlanta, kind of thing. So that's just that particular piece of it.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that, because in his post-game interview with Valley Sports Southwest, the question was asked of him, like, did you hear the crowd cheering for you? And he goes, yeah, I definitely heard the Mavs fans. I heard the fans cheering for me. I even heard some chants of MVP. Now, did you have to say that last part?
Yeah,
did you really? Did you threw that in? Yeah, you got a little petty with it.
And that's not surprising either, by just some of the Hawks fan base sometimes. And hey, if you want someone who ain't gonna keep it real, then you probably watching the wrong podcast right now. But that's all we know how to do on this program. Right. But there's a long history of years where you had instances where the fan base is screaming MVP and coming to sell out the seats for a whole different player on a whole different team. But getting back, to the subject at hand, obviously the ball movement was impeccable, and it's unfortunate that we were looking, it kind of felt like the Hawks were like sitting back looking at their imaginary watches, counting down the time, like, is this game ever gonna hurry up and get over with? I mean, that's just kind of the vibe and the energy and the feel that it gave on tonight. I know that we're kind of up against it on the break, whatnot, but definitely want to throw in that piece, because it felt kind of hopeless.
And you're not wrong about that. There were 2 times where I talked to a couple of other reporters and analysts tonight. And what we did was we watched kind of in small part. We took like maybe 2 or 3 possessions, right? And we watched, and you talk about the assist, and the assist number was high, 32 assists for the Hawks, but there was a difference in it. There was an intentionality on the possessions, the 2 possessions we watched with the Mavs, and the 2 possessions that were in between with the Hawks. It just didn't, it didn't seem intentional. The ball movement almost seemed like, hey, I'll toss it over to that guy. Okay, he's not going to shoot it. I'll toss it over to that guy. And by the time it got to Dejounte Murray was the 4th person to touch the ball. He shot it. It went in. That's great. So it looks like it's intentional ball movement, but that's not kind of what I saw. And, Willie Carswell Jr., I hear what you're saying when you say that it was embarrassing, because you're right. Like, the 5-point differential doesn't really tell the story of this game.
It doesn't.
That 5-point loss doesn't tell the story. And we're going to talk more about that in the deep dive, because there are a few more nuances to this game that tell way more of the story than that final score. More on the game, 148-143, Hawks lose to the Mavs, when we come back. Well, I got to tell you, there's one team that seems like they are always winning, and that's the eBay Motors team. Our partners at eBay, they've also teamed up with us here at Locked On. Our fantasy basketball host, Josh Lloyd, is bringing you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. So whether you're preparing for a daily double or daily draft or scouting the waiver wire every week, we're going to provide you players that are going to be guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. I'll go with your boy, Brandon Miller. Now, granted, the Hornets got blown out tonight, so that's the caveat that I'm going to go with for you guys. But he should be seeing an uptick in usage with Terry Rozier off to greener pastures. Miami Heat, although we know how they're swooning, but for the most part, that's a better opportunity for Terry Rozier. That also is an opportunity for Brandon Miller because that gives him more roster time to play. And that's a player maybe you should look for in fantasy. He's now increased his numbers to 29 minutes per game. Also, every category he's increased his numbers, including now up to averaging 16 points a game and also averaging nearly 5 rebounds. So it's a player that you want to take a look at. Josh also is going to help you win your fantasy championship, just like eBay is going to let you know how to win the championship for you as a car owner, because hey, they find a perfect fit, just like teams find a perfect fit, and Josh finds a perfect fit. They do it with your vehicle. Now, I told you guys about my car. There's a fantasy or a dream car that I have out there, but unless and until that time comes, the ride that I'm rocking right now is the one I want to trick out. And guess who helped me to do it? eBay. They are just amazing when it comes to what's going on under the hood, but also what's inside your car, because they have 122 million parts for your ride or die. So you can make sure your car is running smoothly. If you need maybe brakes or brake kits, they've got it. Or if you want to make sure your ride looks fly, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever you need, they've got it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, don't forget, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. All right, DeShaun, now time to go a little deeper into this game with the and one. One of the things that we always talk about, and not to be, I guess, looking at things with rose-colored glasses, but if we can find a positive in something, we're going to find it. So, okay, we've already told you, the Hawks lost. We get that. But DeShaun, there's always some good that you're going to see in a game. What maybe did you see that was a positive takeaway from tonight's game?
I don't know how much of a positive that it is necessarily for the Hawks as much as it is a negative for Dallas. But 143 points scored against you, I think there's something to say there. Nobody's really, everything's going to be overshadowed, and I get why, by Luka's 73-point performance. But, you know, when you start factoring in the lack of defense by Dallas throughout this entire game on a night where, you know, the Hawks were not going crazy and having some of their, you know, grade A or maybe even grade B performances, for whatever reason, it kind of seemed like sometimes Trey was kind of hesitant to shoot from long range. Not exactly sure what that's about, because I've never seen that before. But yet still the Hawks found a way to have themselves in this game. Just coming right out of the gate, and it may seem like it's nothing, but especially because, like we always mention, DeAndre Hunter not being in the lineup, who was typically the guy that I think they wanted to come right out the gate and get warm and start early and often. Who is that player? And it seems like whoever that player is that they choose, that player scores the first, you know, few points for this team consecutively before anybody else scores. And that player was Jalen Johnson with 7 points. As you can see, he had himself obviously a really good game. Just from that standpoint, you know, they know that that's someone that they need to stay, you know, to stay hot for this team, to give them a fighting chance. And you had to do that early, and you had to do that often. And he was one of the, he was the guy that it happened. And then also on top of that, I think that once you kind of factor in, you know, the trying to see who are they going to put on. They started out with Jalen Johnson, then it, you know, transitions over to a whole nother player. I think Sadiq Bey.
Yep, it was Sadiq.
There was some positives with a whole nother player that kind of has you scratching your heads as to whether or not he should or shouldn't remain in the Atlanta Hawk uniform going forward. But I'm sure you're going to touch on that a little bit.
Oh yeah, we'll get to our guy in a second. 5, we're on the way. 5, we're on the way. But yeah, to your point, I think the positives would be shooting. Like, this is the 5th best scoring team in the NBA, and they showed why they're at the top in the association, because they did have a good game from the field and from 3, 52% from the field, 44% from three. But I'm about to go and slightly contradict myself because I'm going to go back to that same number, that 44% from three, and how many you took and why you didn't take them when we needed it most. But first things first, I'll give them a few more flowers because I have been on their case for a minute now. And that's about that free throw percentage. When you get free buckets, take free buckets. So at least tonight, they made 26 of 30. And that is a large part of why they were able to stay in the game. Another thing that I've been on them about was not giving themselves opportunities for second chance points. And they did have 12 offensive rebounds to the Mavs 6. So I'll take that each and every night. But those are probably where it kind of stops for me because I think points in the paint, yeah, you kind of outscored the Mavs 60 to 56, but I mean, they more than made up for it outside of the paint. So there's that. Mm-hmm. But speaking of that 3-point line, knowing that you were shooting 44% from three, you had to kind of have a feel and know that you were having a really good night from three. So then you closed to within three, and the Mavs kept shooting threes towards the end. This was about a minute 47, maybe 2:15 left in the game. So they shoot three in a row, and they hit three in a row. While the Hawks were settling for twos. And DeShaun, I really looked at it and said, what did that tell you about situational awareness for the opponent versus the home team, understanding where you were in the game and where you should have been shooting at that point?
And that's the thing. Like, I feel like, sometimes we tend to question the shot selection a little bit with this particular team and just the effort. I always mention consistently inconsistent. And what I mean by that is sometimes we'll see them, playing very good defense for certain quarters, and then other quarters they don't. I know third quarter is always one that's kind of highlighted in our minds a lot of times.
Exactly.
And then obviously the shot selection and things like that, which I don't think that they did a terrible job at, but we obviously pay so much attention to the free throw line and getting to the free throw line and making sure you hit the free throws. They're free throws and called that for a reason. But then there's turnovers. And when you look at, like I said, you had to be watching this game because you can't sit back and look at the box score or the stat sheet and try and see if that tells everything about the game, like you kind of mentioned earlier. Didn't have a ton of turnovers necessarily, but in the moments of which they gave the other team the ball were those moments in which they had, their chances to be able to get back in this game, or they were already in the game, to really take this game by the horns and say, this is going to be our game. We don't care how many points you score on tonight. You're not going to remain victorious in this game. And they had those chances to do so as well. And I think that those are just a few of the things that this team has to do in order to, show some growth.
Yeah, because there was definitely a critical turnover inside those last 2 minutes. And when you look at the margins of that 5 points, like you said, don't be confused. It wasn't that close until that last 3 or so minutes. Mm-hmm. But I also agree with you. There were also moments where the Hawks clearly had opportunities to seize the moment and just never capitalized on it. Mm-hmm. And it was troublesome. So you look at Luka, and obviously his was the performance of the ages, because he has the most 40+ point games before turning 25 years old since Michael Jordan. He has 37 career 30-point games or 30+ point games versus MJ's 32, but it's and counting, right? So there were moments where I looked at it, and you already called out one of them, where Jalen Johnson was on him and then Sadiq Bey was on him. And I was like, does anyone understand the assignment tonight? Like, clearly, except Dejounte Murray, because when Quin Snyder switched Dejounte on Luka, it felt like DJ understood it. And obviously he didn't stop him, but he at least slowed down some of the momentum.
Sure. And I think that, why it took so long for us to get to that point, I don't have that answer. I don't make the money to get paid to give that answer either. But you would like to think that one of the reasons for why you were so excited about bringing Dejounte in is not only because he is this near triple-double, averaging, I think he was somewhere around 20-something, 22 points a game or whatever it was, and eight rebounds and 8 assists or whatever it was, but also because of what you're getting on the opposite end of the floor on the defensive side of the ball. and then you wait so long to be able to see what he can do in that moment.
Yeah.
Am I thinking that he was going to stop Luka? Absolutely not. Right. But I do believe that there was a better chance at him defending Luka Doncic for extensive periods of time to give, the Hawks a chance to understand what it takes to contain him.
Yeah.
And they waited quite a while to give themselves that chance. Yeah. And that one's on coach.
Yeah, that's a tough call because Josh Green didn't really light up. He didn't really warm up rather until later in the game. So I'm thinking if it's a good on good situation where you're saying, okay, that's who you have, DJ. You didn't really kind of need to give Green that much attention. Because he really didn't start to be a factor really until the fourth quarter. So, that's one of those things. So David Thatcher says, Wrestler, of course, referring to Tony Wrestler, the owner, should be happy the Falcons are in Atlanta because only the second biggest crap show in pro sports. I don't know if I can agree with that. That's kind of strong, David.
I definitely don't agree with that.
I don't think either one of these teams is like a purposeful crap show. But David, to your point, I think what's frustrating is that you look at an opportunity like tonight and you think about, and granted, the Suns are like balling out, right? Except for maybe tonight when they lost, but the Suns are balling out, but the Suns did damage to the Mavs, right? So they kind of gave you a little bit of the blueprint in how to come back from like a deep double-digit deficit and then smoke them.
Mm-hmm.
The Hawks had enough guns to be able to do that.
No doubt.
And I think that's what he's talking about when he says, hey, it's like a crap show or a crap shoot, because they had chances, but they just didn't take them. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that because in all fairness, we do have to defer to one trend that we're seeing that could explain some of what we saw tonight. We'll talk about it on the other side in Who Next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast, of course, was brought to you by eBay Motors and is also brought to you by Grammarly. Now, when it comes to writing, Grammarly is there to support you from start to finish. And personally, I love Grammarly because I'm that person who always wants to speak, I guess, what they call the King's English and just get it right. So for over 10 years, Grammarly's been powered by, interestingly enough, AI technology, one of the forerunners with that. You can trust them, therefore, to help you across all the places where you write the most. Now, Grammarly helps you to do even more with just one click. You can easily brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your context goals, so you can improve productivity for you and your teams. And when you think about it, DeShaun and I, as co-hosts and analysts for this show, he's also a producer. So oftentimes we're under the gun trying to help each other to come up with the most creative taglines so that you guys can tell your friends to check in. Well, how do you come up with that? Grammarly can help. Describe a situation with Grammarly. It'll tell you whether or not that fits. It'll tell you what some possible taglines are for those video thumbnails so that you guys can know if we're giving you content that's interesting. And we certainly hope and believe that we do. So if you have a big presentation coming up, Grammarly can help you with that as well, because it can create a personalized outline for you. And the best part is, once again, it's free to use. So go to Grammarly.com/podcast to download for free today. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. All right, Sean, going a little bit back into the conversation we were having about who understood the assignment. Obviously, Dejounte Murray understood it more so than anybody against Luka tonight. But in all fairness, letting one guy go off is actually happening league-wide at a historic clip. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. I want to kind of throw some numbers out there and get your thoughts on it. Through the NBA's first 75 years, just 6 players had scored 70 or more. Wilt Chamberlain, Kobe Bryant, whom we'll talk about in a minute, David Thompson, Elgin Baylor, Devin Booker, and David Thompson actually did it twice. And then in just over 1 year, already 4 players have reached 70. Donovan Mitchell, Dame Lillard, Joel Embiid, and now Luka Doncic after tonight. And then the 73 he dropped, just the 4th player in NBA history to reach that plateau. Again, going back to Wilt, Kobe, and David, the 10th player in NBA history to score 70 or more. It's crazy things like that to think that 4 of them have come in this last year. So maybe in all fairness, letting a player go off the way that Luka did it tonight. Well, 77 is not the only one. It's kind of happening league-wide wide at a historic clip.
It is. I hate the fact that it has to happen to this particular team.
Right.
That I think anybody on here watching would probably feels the same way or knew that I was going to say exactly that. And that part obviously stinks. And yes, you do have, we talk about in comparison to the 80s and the 90s and different eras of basketball in general and just the NBA, how much, more developed that the talent pool is. And when you've got, some of the best scorers in the NBA, things like that are going to happen. You start to factor those things in. And I mean, granted, I think that you'll be really hard pressed to find anybody who's being honest with themselves and realistic when I say, that there will be anybody that would disagree with me when I say that the pride that players take today on defense, I don't think is nearly as much as it was before. I'm sure there's quite a bit of, current and former NBA players that never want to hear that. But that's just that. I mean, that's just the reality of what it is. So, guys are going to get their points. Guys are going to get numbers. That's the league and it's different rules that we're playing by today anyway, on top of that. But the guys are really good. How does things like this happen? I mean, think about it. You just did a phenomenal job breaking down some of the accolades, from 77 tonight, right? But add on the fact that being the first player ever in NBA history to score 70 plus points on 75% shooting from the field. 75% shooting from the field. There's going to be things sometimes on some nights that you're just not going to be in control of. I will say that I'm not sure that there is a living being, right, that could have prevented, Luka from doing what he did on tonight. Just if I'm just being perfectly honest, and not even the best defender probably in the world ever that we've ever seen from any era of your choosing could have done much to defend, 77 on tonight. So sometimes you do just have to give, you got to take the L, you got to give the flowers, but it's crazy to believe that we're seeing what we're seeing, the way that we're seeing it, even with the point totals and scoring for the particular teams. I mean, 150 points being hung up on teams. Those are all-star game numbers and point totals that we're seeing. So some of it, I think, is just the evolution of basketball in general.
And I think that it's tough because you and I had the opportunity to see a Michael Jordan who was like a scoring machine and then realized, hey, I need to play D. Hey, I need to distribute the ball. And that's when he started winning championships. So in addition to us giving that stat line about Luka approaching what Michael Jordan did with all of the 40 plus games, if you will. Well, the other piece of that is Michael Jordan, as his career evolved, he prided himself in D. And like you said, you don't hear many players these days talking about, hey, I went back in the lab because I now want to be defensive MVP. I want to be defensive player of the year. No, we don't hear that conversation unless DeShaun and I just are missing it. And I don't think we are. That's number one. And then number two, this also speaks to what David Stern wanted to see, which was an international game. And the international game is played for points. You can even look at the 41 players whose names were dropped a couple days ago as making the U.S. men's national basketball team at least the first cut, right? And then they'll drop that cut down to 12 as they approach the summer games in Paris. Well, you know what the 12 are going to look like. Yes, it'll be a few here and there who can play D, but it's going to be those players like the Luka Doncic's of the world that are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", Kevin Durant. And those are going to be the players who, when you need them to play D, they can stretch just because of wingspan, but oh my God, they can shoot the lights out of it because that's where we are. And Quin Snyder said it best. He told you when he took over this team, we're going to shoot threes. That's who we're going to be because he knows that at the end of the day, yes, you will have to play some defense as you get deeper into the postseason. But ultimately speaking, throughout the regular season, in order to get to the postseason, you absolutely have to be able to shoot the deep ball. No question. And speaking of that, another guy who revolutionized the game here locally, we'd be remiss. And when I say local, of course, to the U.S., if you will, but really ended up revolutioning game across the world is Kobe Bryant. Of course, this is the anniversary of 4 years of us losing the Black Mamba, and one of the greatest. And one of the things I thought of that actually made me smile a little bit in watching what Luka was able to do tonight was looking back and saying, wow, you can really see the imprint in the game tonight, even when you saw what Trey was able to do. And sometimes we forget that he still plays with a heavy heart on these particular nights, but was able to still get out there and do something. What were some of the things that maybe you saw tonight in this game, or even across the association that you've seen, courtesy of the Black Mamba, where you can say, you know what, whether it's 8 or 24, take your pick on his number, you could still see the impression that he made?
Yeah, we talk a lot about Mamba mentality. I think it's just the relentlessness,
Yes.
and guys just going full throttle. You know, I couldn't have pictured Trey Young sitting out on a night like this. I mean, he's coming off of, obviously his concussion protocols and things of that
Sure.
nature. Could have sat down. Obviously, the team hasn't been playing well. There's a lot of other guys in this league that will remain nameless, but probably wouldn't have played in this game, especially if they knew this kind of performance was coming from an opposing player. But yet still went out there and competed, because that is what the Mamba mentality is all about. And you got so many different players that were looking up to, him. And you even, as I was listening to Trey Young in the post-game press conference, as a question was asked to him about what type of things kind of prepared him for tonight. One of the things was just about him just being in the gym. Trying to stay off his feet as much as possible, but knowing you got to get out there and get shots up and things like that. These are players that could just be sitting down and thinking it's just another game that they can just load manage and send the fan bases home with, upset, upset smiles and upset wallets that they just paid a lot of money to go and see their favorite player play. But it's about perseverance and powering and pushing through. And, grateful obviously that he got out there and played, and that a lot of other guys around the league went out there and played, and, going out there and just competing, because ultimately that's what it's about. We on the outside, a lot of times like to look at it as it just playing basketball, but when you start to understand and overstand and realize the business that it is, and the kind of wear and tear that your body goes through to go back out there and have to do it again, this is one of those nights that I'm glad to see guys participating in and giving it their all, because I'm pretty freaking sure that a lot of performances on tonight, whether you scored 73 points or whether you played 3 points, you went out there with the thought of number 8 and or 24 on your mind when you were doing it.
Indeed. And we also want to just acknowledge the fact that Kobe was a huge advocate for the WNBA, and the WNBA tweeted out a memorial and a tribute earlier today, just letting everyone know today we remember Alyssa Altobelli, Gianna Bryant, and Peyton Chester, our 2020 honoree draftees, who of course also lost their lives in that tragic accident. So again, our hearts and prayers are with their families, and we just thank God that we had the opportunity. If you ever had a chance to see him in person, it was one sight to see. So we appreciate that. And we also appreciate you guys for stopping by the Locked On Hawks postcast, especially when you guys take the time to chime in. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and tell your friends to stop by, because they can chime in too. And for more on the Hawks, don't forget to check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We will see you next time.